We're going to have a very interesting Gemara today. Mesechta Yoma, daf Tes, daf Ches Amin Beis through daf Yud Amin Aleph. You can say. We're going to start off discussing the difference between the Kohanim Gedolim, the high priest, in the first Beis Hamikdash and in the second Beis Hamikdash. From there, we're going to go on and discuss the differences in the destruction and in the actions, the way the Jewish people acted during the first Beis Hamikdash and second Beis Hamikdash. So for the beginning of the context of this Gemara, if you go to Ches Amid Beis, 8b, near the beginning of the page, we're going to talk about Lishkas Parhedrin. Mesechta Yoma discusses before Yom Kippur 7 days in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Holy Temple. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, he was put into quarantine for 7 days. Sounds like it could have come out of 2020, 2021. He was put into quarantine for 7 days, not to become tummy, not to become impure. And they would prepare him for the Vayaddata, for the service of Yom Kippur, which was the holiest day of the year, where one person, Kohen Gadol, will walk into the holiest place, the Kodesh Kadashim, the Holy of Holies. Kohen Gadol, he had a house in the city of Yerushalayim. He was never allowed to leave the city of Yerushalayim unless it was something no one else could do or a time of danger. He was never allowed to leave Yerushalayim. But he had another home, which was inside the Beis Hamikdash, right over here, where the mouse is. Over here, it's called the Lishkas Parhedrin, the chamber of the Parhedrin. Parhedrin means a chamber of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest. You see over here, and this is Chabad.org has this. You see the different chambers. Here's the Lishkas Hagazis, the chamber of the High Court, Supreme Court of the Jewish people, where the Sanhedrin would sit, which was halfway over the Azara, halfway into the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. Lishkas Hagula, the chamber of the well, which was supplying water for the Kohanim and for the cleaning of the Azara. And the Lishkas Parhedrin, the chamber of the high priest. And 7 days before Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol would leave his home in the city of Yerushalayim, and he would move into the Lishkas Parhedrin. He would be up the entire night of Yom Kippur, preparing for the service going into the Kodesh Kadashim, the Holy of Holies, on Yom Kippur. On the roof of his house, he had a mikveh where he would go to on Yom Kippur. The roof of the house was a mikveh. And water would be collected, rainwater that would go straight into there.
So many months it did rain.
It will be covered, I'm sure that shouldn't. Yeah. It's called the Parhedrin. Now, Parhedrin is actually a Greek word. Parhedrin is a sort of a clerk. It was a 1 year, sort of like a very sort of dishonorable type of title. Almost like, if you would like to say, the title of the chairman of the UN Security Council, right? Every year it changes to another country, and they give it to Russia and to Syria and to all the people who don't care about war, about human life, human rights. So sort of that type of title was the Parhedrin. These were the tax collectors, which were every year, they appointed new tax collectors by the local government at that time. Says the Gemara, Tanya, Rebbe Yehuda Omer, Lishkas Parhedrin Oisa, Lishkas Balvati Oisa. Was the chamber of the Kohen Gadol called the Lishkas Parhedrin? It was called Lishkas Balvati, or Balvati, however you like to pronounce it. A Balvati is a very honorable term. The Rashi says over here, it denotes someone who's nobility. Rabbi Hanan over here says that it's someone who's wealthy. Balvati is an aristocrat. That would be a fitting name for the Kohen Gadol, especially he lived in a mansion in the holy city. A Parhedrin was the appointee of the king to be in charge of the weights and measures in the marketplace. And it was only for a year long. So why would they change the name from Lishkas Balvati, the chamber of the nobility or the chamber of the wealthy, of the great people or the wise people, to Lishkas Parhedrin, to the chamber of the tax collector, the UN Security Council chair?
Who's in charge of the weights and measures of the market?
Every year was a new appointee, and his name was called Parhedrin. The Parhedrin were the appointees.
One of the things he would check the weights and measures.
So why was it called Parhedrin? Very good. So the Gemara is going to say that the Kohen Gadol in the times of the second Beis Hamikdash, the office of the Kohen Gadol was very different than the office of the Kohen Gadol in times of the first Beis Hamikdash. Says the Gemara. In the beginning, in the time of the first Beis Hamikdash, and even initially during the times of the second Beis Hamikdash, they would call this chamber where the Kohen Gadol lived the chamber of the Balafti, of the nobility. However, the Kohen Gadol was a very prominent position in Eretz Yisrael. And you were tasked not only with being the chief Kohen in the Beis Hamikdash, but also you were tasked with many other big, a lot of power. It was more of a political position, sort of, in Eretz Yisrael. In a certain sense, you could say sort of like the Ayatollahs in Iran, who have a lot of power, not just religious leaders, but they have a lot of power as well. Lahavdil, but that was the power of the office of the Kohen Gadol as well. And being that they had so much political power and sway over the people, the king and the powers to be took a possession. And they would sell the position to the highest bidder. And every year, they would get a new Kohen Gadol, a new high priest, every single year.
Did you have to be a Kohen?
It had to be a Kohen. But it became very corrupt. And it's not going to say here in the Gemara, but it's going to, with this other Pirushim, that whenever they would walk into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies, if you were a tzaddik, if you were holy, you were survived. But if you're not holy, then the Kedusha, the holiness was too great for you. If you were not worthy, and then they would pass away. The Rebbe actually brings about, the Rebbe's Melamed Chus talks positive about every single Jew, especially in our days, these days, we're going to see soon in the Gemara. It's important to talk positive about every Jew. So the Rebbe would say, to look at the positive side of these Kohanim, that even though they knew that when they go into the Kedoshim, the Holy of Holies, they're going to die. As a matter of fact, it says they would walk in during times of a second Beis Hamikdash with around their ankle. They had sort of a ring around their ankle with a long chain. And if it didn't come out, they would pull them out because it couldn't go into the Kedoshim to take them out if they passed away. But the desire of these people to go into Kodesh HaKadoshim was so great that they would pay so much money for it, even if they would know that they're not going to survive the year. They still would want to do it. Rebbe would take a positive twist on this. So since it would pay so much money, they would give money for to buy the office of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest. And every 12 months, they used to get a new Kohen Gadol, a new high priest, either because he passed away, or because the Kohen Gadol was resold. The position was changed every single year, because might as well make a lot of money. The king should make a lot of money by selling this position.
Money going to who's auctioning it out?
The king.
Oh, the king.
The king would auction it off. They used to auction off different taxes, right? Different offices, different ministries. Nowadays, they just do it. They just give it a different name, right? And even more than that, similar to nowadays, when you have every time you have a new president, they or the first lady could design the Oval Office however they want it to be. So every single Kohen Gadol would redesign this room in the Beis Hamikdash according to their taste. So this room would also have a renovation, would change every single 12 months, every single year. Each one would feel they have to build one that's more beautiful than the Kohen Gadol before them. So every 12 months, this room in the base of Hamikdash was redone entirely. Kiparhedron halalu, similar to these parhedrons, these officers, appointees who are in charge of the regulation of the weights and measures in the marketplace. Every 12 months, they will be switched out. Sounds like Stalin's cabinet. Yeah. Therefore, it was called the chamber of the parhedron. Parhedron, which is not a honorable title, but rather a less honorable title. Tanan Hassam, we learned in a Mishnah in Mesechta Demai. We're going to bring another Mishnah to understand what are these parhedron exactly, and what type of tremendous characters and great people were appointed to be Kohanim Gedolim in the second base of Hamikdash. And we're going to go back and forth about the bakers in Yerushalayim. They don't have to separate to Turim Gedolah. Yochanan Kohen Gadol, Yochanan the high priest, if you're Shalach Chagvul Yisrael, V'Leishman Frishon Turim Gedolah Vavad. Yochanan the high priest, he sent emissaries throughout Eretz Yisrael and investigate how careful the Jewish people would be about separating the gifts, the Kohen, Turma, and Meiser, without which you cannot eat any of your grain. Amar Ula, says Ula, Mitorich sheparhedron halalu, choiftim oisam kol shnei maser chodesh. Every beginning of the year, every 12 months, or perhaps every end of the year, according to other understandings, these parhedron, these appointees who were appointed to be Kohen Gadol, they would beat the bakers at the beginning of every 12 months. Either they would beat them or they would harass them, and they would tell them, Michru bezal, sell cheaply, sell cheaply. Because the parhedron were the appointees of the king to collect the taxes for the weights and measures. And now these Kohen Gadols, who used to buy this position from the king, and they would say, we have to anyways collect Turma and Meiser, as we're anyways going around to collect, we'll save the king a bother of having to hire someone else. We'll collect the taxes from them as well. And the king would say, oh, great idea. Right? Kings back then, we're talking about mainly kings from the house of Hashmonai, later on from Hordus and Agrippas, but particularly these type of kings. And so these Kohen Gadols, they were empowered to make the chart to determine the prices in the market. Now, knowing that they're only going to be there for 12 months, they want to make as much money as possible. So they would tell them, sell for the cheapest price. And they would tell them, you're not selling enough, sell for cheaper. What happens when things are cheap?
There's a big inflation.
Everyone ends up going out to buy. Inflation, but it's not my problem. Inflation will happen after 12 months. In the meantime, let me make my money. I don't care what happens after 12 months. So every beginning of the year, they would tell them, sell cheaply, sell cheaply. And they would make it very low in order to collect a lot of money. How would they collect a lot of money? As Rashi says, either they collected a set fee for every item that was sold. So not percentage, but a fee. Let's say every item had $1 tax. So you pay $4 for a loaf of bread and an extra $1 to the parhedron, which would be the Kohen Gadol. Or they will make the prices so low, you got to sell your loaf of bread for 25 cents, and the bakers wouldn't listen. And then they would fine the bakers. Oh, you're not listening to the law. And they give them tremendous fines. And the bakers wouldn't be too happy. Or another understanding is that they would set a price. But they would decide how much of the price goes to the baker and how much goes to them. They would say, oh, the price of the loaf of bread is 50 cents. You're charging $5, $4.50 is mine, and 50 cents for you. Instead of saying that the price of the bread is $5, $4.50 for the baker, because he had to get all the ingredients and he had to work and do the effort, and 50 cents for me, because I have the power to do it. Instead, they would say 50 cents for him and 4.50 for me. So the bakers would not be so happy, right? Because they would be harassed, they'd be beaten by these parhedrin. So the rabbis were lenient, and they said that they don't have to separate Meiser Sheni from their Demai, because if they start separating from it, they're going to lose so much money that it's not even going to be worth it for them to sell. So therefore, they set a baker in consideration of their livelihood. It's a threat to their livelihood if they have to separate so much Trumas and Meisers, because not every farmer would do it. So many times the bakers would have to do it. So the rule was the bakers had to do it. So the people buying at home don't have to do it. Imagine telling you, like it was back in the olden days, we're selling you a chicken kasher yourself at home. Nowadays, it wouldn't fly, it wouldn't go.
Yeah.
Back then, it would.
Unless you're going to be kosher liver, because actually, there's still a demand for raw liver, and then you have to unraw it.
Correct. So therefore, they said you don't have to separate Trumas and Meisers from Suffolk if it's doubtful, if you're not sure if it was done before. So these were characters, the Kohen Gadol, which were a little bit on the surface level unsavory characters. You could say, the Rebbe spoke about how we could find the positive in them, but on the surface level, these were the high priests in the times of the second Beis Hamikdash. My parhedrin. What does the word parhedrin mean? Parhedrin means porsi. What's a porsi?
A
Persian?
Persian, I think, right?
Well, that's a porsi, but more than that, porsi means like a superintendent. Someone who's just put in charge of something. Right? Person is in charge of this and person in charge of that, because you're looking for a position to give him, not that they're worthy of it. So that was what the Lishkas Parhedrin, the chamber of the high priest in the Beis Hamikdash, was. The Gemara will now continue discussing more about the Kohen Gadols in the first Beis Hamikdash and the second Beis Hamikdash. Amar Rabba Bar Chana. So here's a high priest, the Kohen Gadol, with his special garb. Amar Rabba Bar Chana, says Rabba Bar Chana. Amar Rabbi Yechanan, says Rabbi Yechanan. My dichsiv. What is it? What is the meaning of the verse which says, Yiras Hashem Toisif Yamim Ushnoiser Shoyim Tiktzarna? If one fears God, they would live long. However, the wicked person will have a short life. This is from the wisest of Almen. Marsha explains that when a person is born, it's decreed already how long they will live for. But this is not a final decree, it could change. If a person is a tzaddik, they're married to do mitzvahs, they'll live longer than that time. And if a person is a rasha, the opposite, their lifetime could be shortened due to being their wickedness. So he says, Yiras Hashem Toisif Yamim. He explains this pasuk and this verse to mean it's going on two different time periods. The first Beis Hamikdash, Toisif Yamim, is Hamikdash Rishon. The first Beis Hamikdash was a time when one who feared God lived a long life. It stood for 410 years. And there were altogether 18 Kohen Gadols throughout the first Beis Hamikdash. Now, over 410 years, 18 Kohen Gadols comes out to be each one had about 7-8 years. However, if you look in Divrei Hayamim, Divrei Hayamim goes through the list of the Kohen Gadols, of the high priests, from Aaron HaKohen all the way to the end of the first Beis Hamikdash. Altogether is 23 Kohen Gadols. From Aaron, Elazar, Pinchas. Now, what's 23 minus 18? 3.
Yeah.
Okay. And the first Kohen Gadol in the Beis Hamikdash that we have written down is Tzaddik, or Azariah even. Correct? Azariah.
Oh, there's a difference of 5. 23 versus 18.
Well, Pinchas was the third Kohen Gadol, because it went Aaron, Elazar, Pinchas. If you remember, Eli, Kohen Gadol.
Yeah.
Correct? And then, so you had many Kohen Gadol's throughout all this time. And Yehoitzadek was the last Kohen Gadol, and he was exiled. He was sent into exile together with all the other Jews by the Babylonians. So you don't really get 18 Kohen Gadol's. So you could get either 8 Kohen, some versions take out the 10 and make it 8. Right? Ela Shmona, take out the word Eser. Not Shmona Eser, not 18 Kohen Gadol's, but rather 8 Kohen Gadol's. Some say that there were 9 Kohen Gadol, so you're counting the final Kohen Gadol, and the Kohen Gadol, and the Sgan Kohen Gadol, the assistant Kohen Gadol, who was on a higher level, a higher rung than the regular Kohen, but on a lesser level, he was a replacement, sort of the vice president, who doesn't have as much input, but is greater than a senator. He's a president of the Senate. So that's the Sgan Kohen Gadol was ahead of the Kohanim on a day-to-day basis. So there were 9 Kohen Gadol's and Sgan Kohen Gadol's and assistants. That makes up 18 Kohen Gadol's.
So what did you do as far as actually the whole genealogical list? You have 23.
So right. So either because if you look in Divrei Hayamim, you only have 9 or 10 or 8, depending if you count the last one.
Oh, I see. Oh, does you have less? Okay,
correct.
Okay, I understand.
Right. So
I thought it was more than it's. How are you going to reconcile?
Right. You have less. So how do you have less? Right. If you have 9 so how do you have less? You have less because either you count them and their assistant, or you take out the word Eser. Don't say there were 18 Kohen Gadol's, rather only 8 Kohen Gadol's. Right. If you want to see the list over here. See Aaron, Elazar, Pinchas, Avisha, Buki, Uzi, Zerachia, Merayas, and you go through the list. But altogether 23 till the exile from Aaron HaKohen.
Okay.
Or there's other girsas, Seder Olam Zuta. Seder Olam,
You sure?
Who wrote it?
It was Reb Shari Gaon, who, because actually the Barami project is a relative of mine, so he's traced back of theirs.
Right. So there he has a list of more Kohen. He inserts some more Kohen Gadol's that we're not sure that we're not aware of.
Okay.
So this is in the first base of Hamikdash, whether you had 8 or 9 or 18. But at any rate, every Kohen Gadol lived quite a long tenure. 410 years divided by 9 is each one was about 50 years. Right? Some may be longer, some were shorter. Even if you had 18, each one was about 25 years, 26 years. So each one had quite a long tenure as being a Kohen Gadol. So that is the first base of Hamikdash, which is called to be those Yiras Hashem Tosef Yomim, which those who fear God will have long days of life. However, part of the verse Ushnois Rishayim Tikatsarna, and the years of the wicked will be short. Zeh Mikdash Sheni. This is referring to the second, many evildoers, and their lives were much shorter. Sha'amad Arba Meis Esrim Shana, because the second temple stood 10 years longer than the first one. The second one stood for 420 years. The first one was like we have right at the beginning of Parashas Tetzaveh says you should light the menorah. Kasis Lamar. Kasis is spelled Kaf Saf Yud Saf. Kas is telling you how long the menorah was lit in the Holy Temple. Kasis Chaf Taf is 420. Yud Taf is 410. In the first base of Hamikdash, and right in the first base of Hamikdash, I'm bring this up here. Let's go. That's right. I'm getting the Parashas Tetzaveh. So in the first base of Hamikdash will be 410 years. The second base of Hamikdash will be 420 years. So in the 420 years you had the second base of Hamikdash, how many Kohen Gadol do you think you had? Says the Gemara, you have it right in front of you. Yoser mishleish meyot Kohanim. More than 300 Kohanim served in the second base of Hamikdash as a Kohen Gadol, as a high priest. More than 300. Over the course of 420 years. Now, Out of these 420 years, you had several very pious or holy great Kohanim Gedolim, Kohen Gadol's high priest.
Like Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol.
We're gonna get to every one of these people, right?
Indeed.
Semehem, Arbaim Shana Shimon Atzadik. Shimon Atzadik, you remember his name from Pirkei Avos?
Mhm.
He is buried on Rechov Shimon Atzadik in Yerushalayim. It's right on the exact border between East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem. So until 1967, right, from 1948, we were not able to go to his kever. We were able to go to the staircase on top of his kever, but not to his kever. But now you are able to go to his kever, down, very, very deep down. So Rechov Shimon Atzadik, Shimon the high priest, he's most famous for meeting Alexander the Great.
Yeah.
For Shimon Atzadik, he was from the Mishiyare Knesset Gedolah, part of the men of the Great Assembly, 120 great sages, who included Ezra, Nehemiah, Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi, Mordechai Atzadik. He was from the last of those great sages, the ones who instituted davening, instituted the Torah readings, and Haftarahs, and all that. And he was a Kohen Gadol in the second base of Hamikdash, a high priest, for 40 years. During his time that he was a Kohen Gadol, it says in Mesechta Tamid, this was when Alexander the Great was conquering the entire civilized world at the age of 18.
18.
Correct?
He died at the age of 30-something.
Exactly.
He may have been poisoned.
Very possible. So Alexander conquered Eretz Yisrael, and he had what's called the Kusim. The Kusim, the Kuthians, who only believed in it says they converted to Judaism, but not sincerely, and they hated the Jews. They thought that you Jews are the fake Jews, we're the real Jews, and they always conspired. They always conspired to blaspheme, to demean the Jewish people, and they came to Alexander the Great. And they told him, "Oh, we're your friends, but those Jews in Yerushalayim, they're your enemies." And happy to have any type of allies that he could. And he was convinced to attack the Jewish people and to destroy the Beis Hamikdash, attack the Beis Hamikdash. And Shimon Atzadik was informed of this, and he, at the head of all the Kohanim and the elders, all walked out from Yerushalayim, the gates of Yerushalayim. He was wearing his big kahuna, the 8 garments of the high priest. And when he walked out to greet Alexander, and Alexander saw him at the head of his army, he stopped, got off of his steed, his horse, and he went up to Shimon Atzadik, and he prostrated, bowed down, and fell on his face onto the ground. And his men were astonished. "We're coming to fight. Why are you bowing down to him?" So Alexander explained to them that every night before I go into battle, I have a dream. If I see this man in my dream, I know I'll be victorious in my battle the next day. And if I don't see this man in my dream, I don't go to battle because I know I'm going to lose the battle. And it's this man over here. And then he asked Shimon Atzadik, "Why are you coming to greet me? What do you want?" He says, "We're coming to greet you, so you should not destroy the Beis Hamikdash and destroy the city, because we're being slandered falsely." But he says, "We're being slandered. They told me that you pray for our destruction." And he says, "No. Every day we pray for your success. We pray for your success." And Alexander then, he promised that he'll never touch the Beis Hamikdash. As a matter of fact, he destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, the temple of the Kusim, on Har Gerizim, and he persecuted the Kusim. And Shimon told them, "Could it be that those who serve idols will convince you to destroy a Beis Hamikdash where we pray to Hashem and ask that you and your enemies be destroyed?" And Alexander canceled taxes during all years of Shemitah. He says that if you're not planting the ground, no need to pay taxes. And he gave many, many animals to be served as a Beis Hamikdash. And although he was very nice to the Jews, he was killed very shortly after. And Jewish people, Eretz Yisrael, was now under the reign, the dominion of the Greeks and Greek culture, which eventually led to the Hellenist Greeks, the Syrian Greeks, which eventually led to Hanukkah And you could say that eventually led to the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the Greeks and the Greek influence, which eventually led to the Persian influence, which, etc. Greek influence, which led to the Roman influence. Right, the Greeks it led to the Chashmonaim, and the Chashmonaim for a very short time were pious. Very quickly they became unpious. So Shimon HaTzadik, he was the Kohen Gadol for 40 years. Right now, generally, a Kohen Gadol had two parts. Then he was a spiritual leader, and he also had tremendous power. His office of Kohen Gadol had tremendous strength, and if the Kohen Gadol was always also wealthy, he had to be healthy, wealthy, handsome, children, learned, and nations of the world would all respect the Kohen Gadol. And during the time of Shimon HaTzadik, there's many different stories said, many different miracles said about what happened in the Beis Hamikdash because of Shimon HaTzadik. After he passed away, there was a change for the worse, you could say, what happened in the Beis Hamikdash. So Shimon HaTzadik was 40 years of Kohen Gadol. Back to the Gemara. For 80 years, the Kohen Gadol was Yochanan. Which Yochanan was the father of Matisyahu ben Yochanan, like we say in Al-Nisim, ben Matisyahu ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol. Not everyone holds that that Yochanan was actually a Kohen Gadol. But the Gemara in Mesechta Brachas tells us that Yochanan was a very tremendous tzaddik. He was a Kohen Gadol for 80 years. Imagine how old he was. For 80 years, you have to be already elder and great. And he survived 80 years of going to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And after 80 years, he became a tzedukki. A sadducee. He stopped believing in the Torah Shabbat Peh. And there's stories of Kinyanai who poured the wine on his feet instead of on the Mizbeach, and the people threw a sregim at him.
Yep.
The Gemara says without a name, right? But it's brought down in other places in Yosef with the name Kinyanai, as there was a massacre of the Jewish people afterwards. And some say that Kinyanai was Yochanan Kohen Gadol. Some say that. I mean, the person who massacred was tremendously persecuting the sages was Yochanan Kohen Gadol. Some say after 80 years. And from here, you can understand what it says in Pirkei Avos: Al tamin be'atzmach an yom Mesech. Don't trust yourself till your last day on this world, because Yochanan Kohen Gadol, after 80 years of going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, seeing Hashem face to face, seeing how space doesn't take up space and everything else that comes with it, and he became a tzedukki. So for 80 years was Yochanan Kohen Gadol. So Eser Sheshimish Yishmael ben Pavi. Yishmael ben Pavi, he was a Kohen Gadol for 10 years. In Mesechta Pesachim, he's described as a follower of Pinchas. Pinchas was an Ish Shalom, a man of peace. His family was all known to be people of disrepute, but he was a very big tzaddik. He was very wealthy, and it says in Josephus, that Agrippa II appointed him to be the Kohen Gadol.
And who is this again?
Yishmael ben Pavi. So he was a Kohen Gadol for 10 years. And it says when he passed away, the beauty of the kahuna passed away with him. And Rabbi Elazar ben Charsam, he was a tremendously wealthy person, fantastically wealthy. His father left him 1,000 cities and 1,000 ships. So he was a tremendously wealthy person. And he says, I didn't let any of that disturb me from learning Torah. He learned Torah by day and by night. And he is held up as an example of any rich person who says, I'm too wealthy to learn Torah. I have no time to learn Torah. You weren't wealthier than Rabbi Elazar ben Charsam. You weren't collecting rent on 1,000 cities and 1,000 ships. And if he could learn Torah, you could learn Torah as well. And he was a Kohen Gadol for 11 years as well. Oh, wow, shakayach. So Rabbi Elazar ben Charsam, he was a Kohen Gadol for 11 years. Yishmael ben Pavi was a Kohen Gadol for 10 years. 80 years of Yochanan Kohen Gadol, and then 40 years of Shimon HaTzadik. How many years did he get altogether? 120 plus 21 is 141. So you have 141 years where we accounted that there's only 4 Kohen Gadol. So now make a calculation that how many years are left over from 420 years of the second Beis Hamikdash. We already took away 121 years. So 141 years. So we leave 279 years for the rest of the Kohen Gadol. Right, 279 years for another 286 Kohen Gadol. So it comes out, how long did every Kohen Gadol serve? Less than a year.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So let each Kohen Gadol serve for less than a year. Now, again, there's many midrashim about different people or Kohen Gadol. For example, it says Kimchis, a woman named Kimchis. She was a big righteous woman, and she had 8 sons, and all of them served in the Beis Hamikdash as a Kohen Gadol. So how's it possible? A Kohen Gadol is a lifetime position until they pass away or they become infirm. What about all the Chashmonayim? Which ones of them were Kohen Gadol? Some were. Some say Ezra was a Kohen Gadol, Matisyahu Kohen Gadol, Yishmael ben Elisha Kohen Gadol. Right. So who was exactly a Kohen Gadol? You have different places. The 7 sons of Kimchis. He says in the merit that she was so tznius, so modest that even the walls of her house never saw her hair. Oh, wow. Wow. So who exactly were all these Kohen Gadol? So perhaps some of them were Kohen Gadol who were Kohen Gadol for a year. There's another explanation, another pirush which sort of fits in, is that the Kohen Gadol, as we said, had 2 positions that he filled. One was being Kohen Gadol in the Beis Hamikdash, spiritual leader of the people. And one was a lot of power, collecting taxes, political power, deciding things, Turmas and Maestros. And therefore, it could be that they divided these 2 positions into 2 different people. One, you says, you should stay in the Beis Hamikdash and not deal with the people. And we'll the king would appoint someone else to deal with the people, do the jobs that the Kohen Gadol would have to do to represent every Jewish people to others. It says Yoma. Base. I made a copy, but I'm going to make a few copies for tomorrow. But the fact that we have now for another 271 years left of the second Beis Hamikdash that are unaccounted for, we're not from these 4 people. And then we have what's 300 minus 4?
300 minus 4 is
296. So we see, if you make a count, none of these Kohen Gadol, none of these high priests outlived a year. Right. In Yaakov, he adds an extra part over here. But some Gemaras put it in. So we'll have it over here. Amr Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta. Says Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta, V'chol kach lama. Why did this all happen? Why did the Kohanim not die before the year of being a Kohen Gadol was finished? Because they would spend money, they would buy the position for money. They wouldn't imagine. We used to be in the U.S. was very common that you would have political appointees. So you could buy offer being an officer in the army, being a general in the army. You could buy it for money.
Jews used to buy the way out of
The Jews used to buy to not go into the draft. But if you wanted to pay money, you could become an officer as long as you would pay all your soldiers and you commission and you could be a soldier in the army. And some of the biggest mistakes in many of the wars happened from these political officers or appointed officers who weren't really worthy of being in the army. And the Gemara gives, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta gives an example. Russian commissar is correct. They were all political officers. He used to pay money in order to get the position. The Amar Reb Asi says Reb Asi, Tarkava de Dinri Ailale Marta Baspaisos Liane Malta. Marta Baspaisos, you might recognize her name.
Yeah.
a very wealthy woman, right? She gave money to come to the sages. B'Baisus, and it describes how during the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, she passed away eating one of Reb Tzadok's figs, right? Was Martha B'Baisus? She was throwing out all of her, before she passed away, she threw out all of her money, all of her gold and silver and silks from her window. She had absolutely nothing to eat. So Martha B'Baisus went to Yanai HaMelech, King Yanai. When we spoke about, some say it was Yochanan Kohen Gadol, but he was a Kohen definitely, and he was a very despotic king. Yeshua ben Gamla v'kahane Rav Revi, and he bought the position of a Kohen Gadol for Yeshua ben Gamla. And it seems that even after Hordus overthrew all the kings of Hashmonai, he still continued this custom. It's a moneymaker for the crown. Why not?
Yeah.
As Agrippa, like we said, Agrippa sold the position of Kohen Gadol, and Agrippa was from the descendants of Hordus. He was the son of Hordus.
But why would she buy like Yehudim?
You buy a kibbutz for?
Let's say Chassan Torah.
Yeah.
Final Aliyah, Chazak.
Yeah.
And they give it to somebody as a present.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So I down once as a shul, and they called me up, they auctioned it off.
Yeah.
For $2,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
And then they called me up for
that.
So, they're not stupid. If you're given that honor, you're expected to pay that money also.
So you have to pay that money too?
I didn't pay it. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Omer Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta says Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta. Very interesting name, Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta. Torta means a cow. Rabbi Yochanan, the son of a cow. Why is he called Rabbi Yochanan, the son of a cow?
He was a ger, wasn't he?
Either he was a ger or his cow made a ger, according to two different ger sizes. I mean, according to all the kids' books and videos, he himself was a ger.
And then what was the other possibility?
But the other gersa is that Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta, his cow made a ger. But at any rate, the story is made the non-Jew who bought him into a ger. Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta, or it might have been just a regular Jew, according to the two gersais, he had a cow which used to work for him the whole week. He became very poor, and he sold his cow. He sold it to a non-Jew, and the non-Jew was happy with a cow. But then came Shabbos, and the cow would not work. Right? Is there a label here today? The label's not here today. He has many in the Golem. We'll bring it up. The whole story we'll bring up the comic on the screen. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta, he would. It would not work on Shabbos. He thought the animal's sick. He would beat it, and the animal wouldn't work. Sunday it would work again. Shabbos, it wouldn't work. He came back to the Jew with a cow. You sold me a lemon. He says, what happened? He says, it's not working. And the Jew on the Shabbos morning, he's on the way to shul, and has his talis on, and he sees his non-Jew screaming and angry and mad. You sold me a lemon. This cow doesn't work on Shabbos. Doesn't work. He went over to the cow. He whispered something into the ear, and then suddenly the cow got ready to work. He says, what happened? He says, this cow never worked on Shabbos. So on Shabbos, it doesn't work. I told the cow, now you're not owned by a Jew anymore. Now you're owned by a non-Jew. You're allowed to work on Shabbos. And the non-Jew became so impressed that he converted. He became Jewish. And this is Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta. Ben Torta means the son of a cow. Some say, and perhaps this is more logical, this was a cow that belonged to Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta that was sold to a non-Jew. And this non-Jew who bought the cow is the one who converted. But none of the kids' books or videos that I've seen as a kid taught the Gemara this way. It says Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta, why was Shiloh destroyed? Shiloh was a place, we brought up the picture in the past, the Shiloh was a place where the Mishkan was for 369 years before the Beis Hamikdash was built. Well, why was it destroyed? We'll have to, I think, leave on a cliffhanger for tonight, for today. And Eretz Hashem will get to the answer tomorrow. I was planning on doing some Vayaddata Moskva, but maybe we'll do it tomorrow.
Quick question, Rabbi.
Sure.
Regarding the tax collecting function, was there any kind of measure to enforce tax collection? In other words, was there some kind of a police force or some kind of military where there was actually some kind of ability to make sure that those taxes were collected at the behest of the Kohen Gadol?
Yeah, because being at the Kohen Gadol bought his position from the king, from royalty, so he had the whole military and police force, and all the king's enforcers that he had at his disposal were now being put at the disposal of the Kohen Gadol for whatever he needed. So he was able to do it.
Take more of the land.
Right. I'm saying if they wouldn't pay the taxes, he was able to grab their land from them. But as we had earlier in the Gemara, it even said the words that the Kohen Gadol, the storekeepers were chayftin, right? Chayftin usually means they would be beaten. Chayftin is with a stick, they would beat. That the Kohen Gadols would be beating the bakers. How could they beat them? It wasn't them themselves, it was their henchmen, their enforcers. I mean, he was given free reign by the king at that time, whether it was a Chashmonai king or a Roman procator, like a Roman representative at that time, in order to collect the taxes, meaning you just pay me a yearly tribute and you take care of everything else, but you have free reign to do what you want. Excellent question.